NATO calls out China,
saying it cannot enable the largest war in Europe in nearly 80 years without negatively impacting its interest and reputation.
Plus, American missiles are headed to Germany.
The decision will send to Germany the most potent U.S. weapons to be based on the European continent since the Cold War. A U.S.-Germany statement said the longer-term plan is to station in Europe weapons such as Tomahawk and hypersonic missiles.
And later, President Volodymyr Zelenskyy talks to VOA, the latest numbers from Kyiv, and a plan for the next president of the U.S. that some see as authoritarian. Today is Thursday, July 11th, and this is VOA's Flashpoint, Global Crises. Good evening, I'm Steve Karish. As their summit continues in Washington, NATO allies have pledged to support Ukraine on an irreversible path to integration into the alliance, while calling on China to cease all support for Russia's war effort against Kyiv. All this as new fighter jets are set to patrol the skies of Ukraine. VOA's Pentagon correspondent Carla Babb has the details.
American-made F-16 fighter jets like these now heading to Ukraine from NATO allies Denmark and the Netherlands. U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin.
The transfer of F-16s is officially underway, and Ukraine will be flying F-16s this summer.
All 32 allies in a communique calling Ukraine's path to NATO membership, quote, irreversible, in a strong message to Russian President Vladimir Putin that he simply cannot wait out NATO allies. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg.
The work we are doing together now will ensure that when the time is right, Ukraine can join without delay. It is not a question of if, but when.
U.S. President Joe Biden pressed NATO allies to continue their increased defense spending in order to keep up with Russia's wartime production levels.
They're significantly ramping up their production of weapons, munitions, and vehicles. And they're doing it with the help of China, North Korea, and Iran. We cannot, in my view, we cannot allow the alliance to fall behind.
The alliance also calling on China to cease its support of Russia's war machine, saying it cannot enable the largest war in Europe in nearly 80 years without negatively impacting its interest and reputation. Again, NATO's Stoltenberg.
The declaration we have agreed today is the strongest message NATO allies have ever sent on China's contributions to Russia's illegal war against Ukraine.
Analyst and veteran Brad Bowman.
They're providing dual-use technology and support to Russia's defense industrial base, enabling Putin's war of aggression in Ukraine and allowing him to fight longer and to replace his losses.
Analyst and veteran Brad Bowman tells VOA that calling out China was long overdue for the 32-member bloc.
Europeans are dying in Europe in a war of aggression from the Kremlin with the support of Iran, North Korea, and China, period.
Non-NATO partners from the Indo-Pacific joined NATO allies for the summit in Washington this week. Officials say attendance by Japan, South Korea, Australia, and New Zealand sends a message to China that democratic alliances will stand up for the rule of law, no matter where an aggressor tries to break it. Carla Babb, VOA News, Washington.
Also at the NATO summit, it was agreed upon that the United States would send longer-range missiles to Germany. Reuters' Diane Toe has that story.
In a major step aimed at countering what NATO allies say is a growing Russian threat, the United States will start deploying longer-range missiles in Germany in 2 years. The two countries announced the move at NATO Summit in Washington, with U.S. President Joe Biden hailing on Wednesday pledges by member states to invest in defense.
We can and will defend every inch of NATO territory, and we'll do it together.
The decision will send to Germany the most potent U.S. weapons to be based on the European continent since the Cold War. A U.S.-Germany statement said the longer-term plan is to station in Europe weapons such as Tomahawk and hypersonic missiles, which, quote, have significantly longer range than current land-based fires there. In a summit declaration released on Wednesday, the NATO member states said, "We cannot discount the possibility of an attack against allies' sovereignty and territorial integrity."
That's Diane Toe of Reuters reporting for us today. And not surprisingly, the Russian government did not act favorably to the news that new American missiles would soon be in Germany. Deputy Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Rybakov said Moscow had anticipated the U.S.-German missile move. He portrayed it as being designed to intimidate Russia and further destabilize regional security and strategic relations. He said Russia is not intimidated and that it's no cause for nervousness or alarm. Russia will, quote, find a response, he said. And as we know, much of the NATO summit was dedicated to discussing Ukraine, its future and its security. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy was at the summit, and while in Washington, he made his way across town to the Capitol building to meet with congressional leaders. Katerina Lisanova is a congressional reporter for VOA's Ukrainian service. Following Zelensky's meetings, she was able to get a brief question in as he was heading out.
Do you think all restrictions from Ukrainian army would be lifted?
We count on it.
Lisanova also caught up with Hakeem Jeffries, the minority leader of the House.
What was the conversation with Zelenskyy? And I know that Ukraine right now asking to lift restrictions from Ukrainian army.
It was a very positive conversation with President Zelenskyy, and we made clear that we stand strongly with the people of Ukraine in their brave and courageous fight against Russian aggression.
Mike Johnson is Speaker of the House of Representatives, and he seemed to echo Jeffries' support for Kyiv.
Have you been talking about lifting restrictions from Ukrainian army?
The will of the Congress was to allow them the flexibility to use the weapons and assistance that were sent to prosecute the war as they see fit. So I'm a supporter of that. I believe that's what Congress intended.
Thank you very much.
So now I'm joined by Katerina Lisanova for more on Zelensky's visit to Capitol Hill. So we know that President Zelenskyy met with congressional leaders. You spoke to all of them after the meeting. What did they talk about?
The main topic right now on the agenda of visit of Zelenskyy is to lift all the restrictions from Ukrainian army so they would be able to use United States-made weaponry specifically on the territory of Russia, because one of the messages that Ukraine is giving to United States and all the allies that Ukrainian army cannot prevent Russian attacks if they wouldn't be able to strike on Russian weaponry just before they strike on Ukraine. So that's one of the big messages from Zelenskyy in big question that he asked to administration of Biden and to Congress, because Congress actually played quite important role by pressuring Biden administration and calling on Biden administration to lift all the restrictions from Ukrainian army to use that weaponry that already been sent to Ukraine. And as you heard from the comments from Democrats and Republicans who I talked to, they actually both support this issue. They both, most majority of Republicans and Democrats, they support to lift all the restrictions from Ukrainian army. And specifically, Speaker Johnson said that that was the intent of the Congress when they passed the aid. And from their comments from the Congress, they are supporting to not limiting Ukraine with usage of that aid that they already provided. And also one of the messages was to ensure that funding for Ukraine would be also available in the future. That was one of the messages that Volodymyr Zelenskyy specifically published on his social media. That was one of the conversations that they talk about. And actually, one of the messages right now that Ukraine is trying to give to the United States probably in all meetings that they have, is to thank and to show how grateful Ukraine is to get that support that they already have on this moment.
So a lot to unpack there. President Zelenskyy, in his remarks to you, seemed confident that a change would be coming soon to allow the Ukrainian military to use Western-made weapons on Russian territory. Is there any indication of when that might happen, when that might become public?
From his comments, it looks like he from the comments of Volodymyr Zelenskyy that he gave to me, he confirmed the fact that they're working on it, that this is one of the main messages and main questions that they're raising right now during the conversations with high-ranking officials in the United States and Congress itself. On the specifically timing of it, it's very hard to talk about it. And by the end of the day, it all depends on the administration of Biden. But from the administration of Biden, we've heard few messages so far that they're flexible and open to changing of the policy. But it all depends on the situation on the battlefield, on the ground. And this is what, from the administration so far, we're keep on hearing.
Okay, so nothing specific yet. Another thing you touched on in Zelenskyy's meeting with congressional leaders is locking down some of this aid going forward. That way, even if it's a Trump presidency next year, the aid money would still be coming through. Is that something that was discussed? Is that something that's going to be in place?
At least from the statement of Zelenskyy, it looks like that was one of the conversations that they had during the meetings in Congress, specifically a meeting with Speaker Mike Johnson. From the words of Zelenskyy, they've been raising this issue as well, because it is an issue. It is a question. If this aid would be provided, if Congress would pass any new packages of support to Ukraine, any new financial support to Ukraine, so administration would provide any other aid, military aid to Ukraine. And this is the issue and this is the question, and they definitely talking about it. And we cannot say for sure how the next year will look like. But from the statement, at least of a speaker before beginning of the NATO summit, he had a very powerful speech which was calling on the United States and Congress itself to be a leader in international relationship and in the world, and to bring back this leadership of United States to confront all the enemies of United States and enemies of democracy. That was one of the key points of a speech of a speaker before beginning of the NATO summit. And I think this is one of the messages that, at least from the speaker's point, he is willing to keep on playing this crucial role on international arena to support democracy and allies. At least this is what we hear from the speaker. How the next year gonna look like? This is the question, and this is probably the reason why Zelenskyy is raising this question right now during the meetings in Congress.
Now, Katrina, you work for VOA's Ukrainian service. Most of your audience is Ukrainian, Eastern European. What's the sense you get as to how people in Kyiv are feeling about Zelenskyy's performance in Washington this week? Are they overall satisfied, even if the military side of things aren't going exactly as they like? Are they happy with Zelenskyy's performance here, doing what he can?
If being honest, the main conversation in Ukraine right now, it's this terrible attack on Ohmedit hospital, children's hospital, that left a lot of people and kids killed and injured. And if talking about specifically this timing and what Ukrainians are expecting from Zelenskyy and international community, people from the NATO leaders. So from the point of view of Ukrainians, at least from what I'm seeing right now in social media or public statements, they saying that this attack wasn't traced enough and Russia wasn't condemned enough for this attack.
And we'll leave it there for today. Katrina Lisanova of VOA's Ukrainian service. Katrina, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
You're listening to Flashpoint, a global crises from the Voice of America. I'm Steve Karish in Washington. We'll take a look at a controversial plan for the next U.S. president that many critics are calling authoritarian and dangerous in a few minutes. Now, though, we continue our look at Ukraine. From Kyiv, Anna Chernikova fills us in on the Ukrainian reaction to the NATO summit and the latest on Monday's massive attack.
On Wednesday, President Zelenskyy met with Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House of Representatives, as well as a Senate delegation led by Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer and Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell. The Ukrainian president said that their conversation's key topic was strengthening Ukrainian-American cooperation. They discussed expectations from the NATO Summit, Ukraine's progress in implementing reforms on the way to joining the EU and NATO, and further budgetary support from the US, which is crucial for Ukrainian economic stability. And to follow up on Monday's attacks across Ukraine, but most notably the Ohmedit Children's Hospital in the capital. According to the State Emergency Service of Ukraine, as of July 11, the Russian missile attack took the lives of 44 people and 196 civilians were injured. Of those, 33 people were killed in Kyiv and 11 in Kryvyi Rih. According to a report of the UN Human Rights Monitoring Mission, at least 146 civilians were killed and 672 were injured in Ukraine in the month of June. Although the overall death toll is lower than in May, the number of children killed in June is the highest in 2024. 8 children died and 57 were injured. Meanwhile, the leaders of the member states of the NATO unanimously supported the alliance's new rhetoric regarding Ukraine's future accession to NATO. The statement is more ambitious than the last year's Vilnius Declaration. The key difference is the detailed statement that full membership of Ukraine in NATO has no alternatives. As announced by alliance officials, the summit declaration also introduces the term bridge to membership, which was proposed in the USA, but the decision does not reveal its essence. Instead, the alliance welcomes the progress Ukraine has made since the Vilnius summit on democratic, economic and security reforms, and pledges to support democratic and security sector reforms, which NATO foreign ministers will continue to assess through an adopted annual national program. The Finnish president explained that he considers it important to send a signal to the Kremlin that Ukraine's path to NATO is irreversible. At the same time, some allies believe that the alliance should prepare even more ambitious statements. In particular, Polish President Andrzej Duda wants Ukraine to be invited to NATO at the next summit. In Ukraine, such an outcome was perceived as neutral. Ukrainians did not expect Ukraine to be invited into NATO during the current Washington summit, but there is hope to get deeper cooperation with the alliance and separate member states. Ukrainians believe that Ukraine's membership in NATO is the only guarantee of long-term peace in Europe and the prevention of new aggression from Russia. Anna Chernikova, VOA News, Kyiv.
And now to American politics and what could become a crisis. If former U.S. President Donald Trump wins the November election, he may seek to place the entire federal bureaucracy under direct presidential control. That move, among others, is outlined in a playbook crafted by more than 100 conservative organizations for a prospective second Trump administration. More from VOA's chief national correspondent Steve Herman at the White House.
Donald Trump, campaigning for president 8 years ago, promised to bend Washington's bureaucracy to his will.
If I'm elected president, we are going to drain the swamp in Washington, D.C.
Trump's continuing vow to drain the swamp, meaning to rid government of those who impose policy but are unaccountable to the president, is now backed with a blueprint crafted by more than 100 conservative groups. Project 2025, published by the right-wing Heritage Foundation, instructs how to swing a wrecking ball against the administrative state. Heritage Foundation President Kevin Roberts is warning there may be violence along the journey to its implementation.
We are in the process of the Second American Revolution, which will remain bloodless if the left allows it to be.
After that incendiary comment, Trump tried to distance himself from Project 2025, asserting that while he knows nothing about it and its authors, I disagree with some of the things they're saying. The project's head, Paul Dans, appearing on C-SPAN, left no doubt Trump's words and ideas were the inspiration.
He was president for 4 years, so many of the ideas are carry-ons from his original work. So I would like to think that a lot of it does kind of spring from that first term of Trump.
VOA requested an interview with the Heritage Foundation. The think tank said it could not make anyone available, but emailed a statement stressing Project 2025 does not speak for any candidate or campaign. Project 2025 seeks to eliminate the checks and balances writers of the Constitution, such as James Madison and Thomas Jefferson, crafted through dividing power among the executive, legislative, and judicial branches of the government, according to Will Marshall, the president of the Progressive Policy Institute.
Madison and Jefferson ought to be spinning in their graves when they see how much power they want to concentrate in the next president's hands. And if that president happens to be Donald Trump, then it's a kind of a nightmare for the country, given the way he's misused power in the past.
President Joe Biden's re-election campaign has made Project 2025 a primary target, setting up a separate website dedicated to criticism of it and highlighting liberal media reaction.
Critics are calling it the fascist playbook, and it should be one of the reasons, if not the reason, that you vote this November.
The sweeping plan also calls for slashing government funding for renewable energy and climate change mitigation. The Department of Education would be eliminated. The Federal Bureau of Investigation would be overhauled top to bottom, as would the U.S. Agency for Global Media, which oversees the Voice of America. Steve Herman, VOA News, at the White House.
Haiti's newly elected prime minister toured the country's largest hospital this week after security forces regained control of the facility. VOA's Laurie London has more on the ongoing multinational efforts to curb the deadly violence that has threatened the country's stability.
The Port-au-Prince General Hospital had been taken over months ago by armed groups whose attacks have pushed Haiti's health system to the brink of collapse. Thanking the men and women of the Haitian police force, Prime Minister Gary Conille said this was the first step in taking back the country's infrastructure.
We're here because we have to take back our hospital. Thousands of Haitians, when I was here, 1,500 people used to come to this hospital every single day. And today, it's impossible for them to have access to care. A hospital is not a war zone. Even under the worst circumstances, hospitals are protected.
Gangs have been looting, setting fires, and destroying medical institutions and pharmacies in the capital, where they control up to 80% of the area. Besides the hospital, gunmen have seized police stations, attacked the main international airport, and stormed Haiti's two largest prisons. Hundreds of recently deployed Kenyan police officers are working to weaken the gang's hold, which has intensified since the assassination of President Jovenel Moise in 2021. The situation worsened in February when gangs launched coordinated attacks on government infrastructure, leading to Prime Minister Ariel Henry to resign in April.
The job is to ensure c'est assurer there's a restoration of peace, restauration la paix throughout Haiti, à travers tout Haiti. And we intend to achieve this.
Godfrey Otunga is head of the UN-backed multinational security support mission in Haiti. He reaffirmed the commitment to curbing the gang violence in a mission that aims to create security conditions conducive to holding free and fair elections.
And therefore, there's no room for failure on our side.
U.S. officials have urged the new prime minister to prioritize establishing an electoral council as the country strives to rebuild its government. Laurie London, VOA News, Washington.
And that's going to wrap up today's show. There's more VOA coverage 24 hours a day on our website, voanews.com, and across our social media platforms. On behalf of everyone here at VOA, thanks for listening. Until tomorrow, I'm Steve Karish.
For deeper dives and expert analysis, listen to VOA podcasts. Issues in the News explores the biggest stories every weekend, while International Edition keeps you informed every weekday. Plus, with the 5-minute newscast at the top of every hour, you're always up to date.